Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Aging with Attitude. I'm Phil Koch. I'll be your host this evening, and thank you for watching Channel 21, which services the Charlotte Greater Metro Market. Tonight we have our guest is Patricia Fletcher. She's the Chief Strategy Officer of Elder Care Buddy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, tell us, you are a gerontologist, correct?
I am.
Why don't we start off by telling the viewers what a gerontologist is?
Well, a gerontologist is, and a lot of people sometimes get gerontology confused with geriatrics.
Okay.
But a geriatric population, or geriatrician, which is the doctor that services the medical portion of the aging population, whereas the gerontologist studies biology, psychology, and behavior of an older adult.
Okay.
So what a gerontologist's job includes is case management, from finding a senior center, in-home care, to finding, doing an application for Medicaid or Medicare. And so it's a full comprehensive platform that targets the aging population only.
Covers a full
It's
spectrum.
a full spectrum of aging. So it varies from a cane, senior center, in-home care, managing their finance, reverse mortgage. It's a comprehensive platform.
Okay, all right. Now, Elder Care Buddy is a company you own?
Yes, it is my baby.
Your baby?
It's my baby, Elder Care Buddy. It's about 3 years old.
Okay.
And I've been a gerontologist, as I said, for a while. Mm-hmm. And it started actually out of a need. I started helping friends. And friends started calling me and relying on me to make referrals. And I said, aha.
Yeah, there's a need.
There's a need. And that's how it started.
I think that need is going to continue to grow.
Yeah, and so it was built off of a platform that includes 3 disciplines. First, based on the Census Bureau's population study about aging population and why there's a need. The next 4 decades, how we need to have services for older adults. Right. And in addition to that, really targeting the caregiver, some of the stresses of a caregiver and why that's important to having care for them.
Right. Yeah.
And just how health impacts everything that we do as caregivers.
Yeah. No, I see it every day, absolutely. And the fact that the Charlotte population continues to grow, it's one of the fastest growing markets in the United States. And let's face it, where younger families come, grandparents come.
Right, so to go on that, Phil,
Yeah.
that's been interesting for me. Did some work with the Census Bureau.
Okay.
And one of the trends is that, and reasons why I started Elder Care Buddy in Charlotte, is that there's a lot of in-migration. So there are a lot of people moving from different states because they're following their children.
Yeah.
And they want to be close to their grandchildren.
Yep.
And so based on those things, people are retiring here, and it makes it a larger market where we really need to have appropriate services for older adults.
Yeah, no, it's true, and we're fortunate. I'm sure that's one of the reasons that they check into, is that we have great physicians, great hospitals, great activities to do, and good weather, good cost of living. So I think that'll
and quality of life.
Yeah.
Quality of life changes, and people want to maintain being active. And the Charlotte metro area offers all of those things for an older adult to be retired and still be active and have a great quality of life.
And the Panthers and the Bobcats are
Of course, I can't forget that.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, give me an example, if you could. Give me an example, without saying names because of HIPAA, of just one or two type of clients that you've helped and the type of things that you've helped them with.
Okay, so I'll give you 2 very different
Perfect.
scenarios.
Okay.
And so first I'll give you on a corporate side.
Okay.
And so we have done a lot of training with one of our local hospitals in training employees how to address older adults.
Okay.
And that comes in based on some of my communications background and teaching communications of how to understand this population. What's the behavior of the population?
Right.
How does the baby boomer act different from their parents? What are some of the spending habits of the baby boomer versus their parents?
Right.
So that's one one target group. And so the next is that individual person that has a lot of issues, just don't know where to start. They could live alone and just need to not doing things as they normally would have. And they need to find other ways to find services, whether it's not having appropriate meals, not eating regularly because they can't afford it,
Right.
or they just can't cook anymore and they need somebody or need services that will provide that. So we go in two different areas providing the same type of service.
Right, which is very important, yeah. For people to understand the mindset difference, if they're servicing the older population, which may or may not come into play, versus somebody that's younger. I mean, there are differences. Yeah.
Right, and so some of the big differences are, and the challenges are, just from a marketing perspective in the older population, is
Right.
that somebody that needs services that's 62 does not want to go to a senior center with somebody that's 82.
Right.
So what do we do in the midst of that to provide appropriate services for them, even though they have similar needs?
Right.
So finding that balance and finding that mindset, being able to understand that everybody that's older, or what we consider older, isn't lumped into this one big category of the aging population. It's segmented. And there are different groups within that, and I strictly believe that there's several groups within that population that we need to target very differently as we find appropriate services. So how I spend is totally different than how my mom would spend.
Right.
And even though I'm raised in the same social, economical, religious background, I have all of those things in common, I still think very differently than she does in terms of care, my expectations of care. And so all of those things we need to consider.
I totally agree. I see it every day with the clients that we serve, and people in their 80s and 90s, for example, in particular, have totally different mindsets from people in their 60s, as you say, because they've been brought up in a different generation. They've been brought up in a different type of world economy. When there were wars and there were things like depressions that other generations can't relate to. So their importance on various things are totally different from what we can relate to.
And so I give you an example of the World War II generation, is that they believe that they're saving for a rainy day.
Right.
Okay, so everything is going to be a little just in case. They're saving for their grandkids, they're saving for their children, whereas the baby boomers are spenders. Baby boomers are spending everything they have, right? And they may be in trouble in terms of care later on because they may not have enough money. But total different mindset of how what the care is. And that leads me to something else too that I'm passionate about, is the expectation of care when we do provide the service.
Okay.
Some of that World War II generation accepts service regardless of what it is. And so the baby boomer generation demands good service. Right, so those are the differences that we have to watch out for and make sure that we do, and we try to do in our business as you do in yours.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry. Yes, yes. We had a client about 2 years ago, and the daughter was in her 50s, and the person that needed care was in her, I guess she was in her early 60s, and the person that needed care was in her early 80s. And she said, I don't need any care. She said, I'm saving my money for a rainy day, just like you've referred to, right? And the daughter turned to the mother and said, Mom, you need to look outside because it's pouring cats and dogs.
Yeah, so that is the mentality. And so at first, you have to make sure that the caregiver understands the needs.
Right.
And that it matches also appropriately the needs of the person that's getting it.
Yep.
So it needs to be a balance in that, and that's where our businesses come in finding that balance for that person, because both may not see it.
Not just for the person who needs the care,
but the
caregiver themselves.
But the caregiver themselves don't necessarily understand all the things. And I give you an example. I met someone the other day, and we started talking about being prepared, because I like educating people about why you need this before you need it.
Right.
Usually when you need it, it's kind of late because you're in a crisis at the moment, and you're operating out of an emotional spot and space instead of making rational, good decisions. So when you're prepared for it, you operate a little differently. So I try to get people to plan, do
Right.
long-term planning. And so I met this lady and we started talking, and she's like, oh, my mother doesn't need services. And I said, yeah, how old is she? They're in their 80s. And so I find that amazing that even though they're functioning well in their 80s, it's not the same. And I think that children, we live in a denial space in terms of what kind of care and switching roles. I'm a caregiver, so not only do I know this from an academic standpoint, but I'm also a caregiver. And so it matters. It's an emotional space. You're switching roles,
Right.
and you want to make sure that that person gets the appropriate care they need. It pulls at your heartstring,
Yeah.
because now the person that took care of you, you're taking care of. So caregivers tend to live in that denial for a while, and then they miss things that happen. They don't see it as it's happening because they don't want to.
Yeah.
And then it gets to this place where it's really bad, and now they're trying to solve it all in one day.
Yeah.
Something that took probably 5 years to get to, you know. And so that happens a lot.
Yeah, and they come to that point where, okay, well, who's going to make the decision because mom and dad aren't going to do it right now, and they're looking to me,
Right.
and boom, role reversal happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're like you say, it builds up. It takes time.
It takes time. It cannot be solved in an instant.
Yep.
And they want it solved with a service. And it's not solved with a service. It's a process
Yeah.
that's built over the years. And you have to figure out and weed it out and see what the process is and see what's significant in that process.
And I will say, and it can be times, I mean, things like Medicare and Medicaid and what's out there for seniors, hence a show like this, is all-encompassing, and it changes a lot. So people like us that are in the industry can point things out, but Medicare is a prime example of something that's constantly in flux, constantly changing, and it needs guidance from people in the industry that can help point them in the right direction.
And usually services are very different in different states. So the type of services that are available in terms of Department of Social Services,
Right.
when I make reference to that, it's a little different. So people will come in expecting that or not expecting it. And so we have to educate them, of course, what the differences are and what's acceptable or not acceptable.
I always get a kick out of when we're talking to seniors, and oftentimes, and I know you're going to smile because you're going to relate to this, the seniors will say, well, that's what my daughters are here for.
Yeah.
Well, this is what my wife is here for, you know, not realizing that they have other things in their lives as well.
Right. You're not supposed to. As a
Right,
kid, well, usually families think this too, and not only the person that's being cared for, but families usually assign a caregiver, spoken or unspoken. And so their expectation of what that caregiver does, they've already assigned.
Yeah.
But they did not send that information to the caregiver.
Yeah.
So the caregiver usually doesn't know that's what they're supposed to do. And they do have a life outside of care.
Yes. They could have a career, they could have children, they could have all of the above. And sometimes, in more than one occasion, we've literally stepped in to provide care because the caregiver themselves
Need care.
need care.
And so that leads me to something else that we see a lot. I see that quite often where the caregivers are the ones that are actually getting sick.
Yeah.
And so I always talk about you've got to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And taking care of yourself, as I say this, I say to myself that it's a very difficult task, and you have to really pull back and reevaluate the care that you're giving.
Yeah.
And then see how are you caring for yourself. So that simply means that taking time out to go to the spa or go to lunch or go to meet friends or go on vacation.
Right.
And I'll give you an example of that. One of the very first times I went on vacation without my mother was really weird for me because she always traveled with me. And so get to the point where you're feeling guilty for leaving.
Yeah.
So I'm in a different country calling, checking. is everything okay? Are you doing all right? And she's fine. But it's just that the attachment of caregiving with this role reversal, it's the same as a child, as caring for a child. And I'm an only child, and I never understood it when I was younger, that why my mother was intense and making sure of my well-being and making sure I'm okay. And now I've switched, I've become that person.
Right.
And so it's intense. And so you have to be mindful of taking care of yourself first.
Yeah.
And making sure that you eat, you work out, you eat healthy, all of those things, because I have seen friends that have really gotten very sick from caregiving.
Both physically and emotionally.
Emotionally, it's just a different place that as a kid it's not something you think about. You don't think about caring for your parents when you're older. It's just not something on the scope of what you think. And so then you get to that point and you're forced in that position.
Right.
So there are people that either do it or they don't do it. And so the part of the population that's impacted the most with caregiving is single women.
Right.
And single women are thrown into this, and sometimes they end up being bankrupt. They have no money, they leave their jobs to care for their parents.
Yeah.
And so that's a part of the population that really needs to be addressed. I was doing this study most recently, and the study talked about caregiving and how it impacts children that are watching the caregiving process. And what was interesting about the study was that little girls were impacted most by this caregiving process. They identified with it. They were ashamed of grandma with dementia, and so they were attached to that. And I thought, wow, it really translates. It goes right back into adulthood, because most caregivers are generally women. And so if
What about boys? I'm afraid to ask.
Yeah, I don't think they were emotionally attached as little girls were in that particular study.
Right.
But the little girls were more ashamed of the process.
Yeah.
And then I think of the adult little girl, that little girl that saw whatever caregiving lessons she received as a child, she'll probably take it to her adulthood.
Correct.
And so my grandma lived with us.
Yeah.
And so I can think of lessons and things that I didn't want and wanted as a child, and sometimes see myself kind of having flashbacks of that.
Yeah.
So I think the more we prepare children for caregiving, or what caregiving means, is the more we need to address it, and it will help them in their adulthood.
Yeah. I'm always amazed by caregivers go in and they'll say, well, they go into caregivers being, let's say, daughters, to provide care because there's nobody else, and they're only in for the brief time that they can allot in their daily schedule to do the care and not actually spend the quality time with their parent. Oftentimes they'll come in for 3 hours and they're running around for the 3 hours or 2 hours, cooking, cleaning, running out to the grocery store, but do they actually have that quality time with their parent?
So that there's another part of that too, is being organized.
Yes.
You have to be organized so that you don't lose your mind.
Right.
Because you can very easily lose that. And so if you have 3 hours, you've got to be organized within those 3 hours. What are you trying to accomplish?
Right.
Am I cleaning today? Am I washing today? What is it? I'm just spending time talking today? It has to be defined.
Right.
And once you're organized in that, it just helps that process for the person, and it helps it for you.
Right.
I try to have things in the same place all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a little organized, which is annoying to some.
Good.
But
That's good.
so I tend to have things in the same place, that if I'm across the country, I can call and say, look at the top shelf, look at the bottom shelf, and I know exactly where it is.
Right.
I mean, not only is it good for my mom when she's being cared for by someone else, but it's also good for me.
Right.
Because I don't have to worry about what's happening there anymore.
Right.
I can rely on the organization. The organization does take time, but I believe it's a process that helps the caregiver to function best.
And it also is less stress on you knowing that it's there.
Yeah.
You can leave and truly get away for work or get away for vacation knowing that everything's set in place, that you could pick up a phone and someone could step in to help if need be.
Yes, it's such a peace.
Yeah.
And that's what caregivers need. We need peace in terms of how we relate to our parents and how we take care of their parents and know that we're doing well as we go through this emotional process of caring.
I always get a kick out of so many people will start up a case, and especially I'm a guy, so I see it in
Guys
the
are a
guy's
little
face.
different.
They're different. They're always like, well, I have a wife and a daughter, and that's what they're here for.
Yeah.
And you can see the daughters rolling their eyes like, oh God, Dad, I've got a job and I've got children and I want to be here. And you're right, it comes a lot to guilt too. They want to be there, and an all-encompassing soul want to be there as often as they can.
But they can't.
But they can't.
They can't.
It's just impossible in some cases to be there as often as they can.
And it has nothing to do with how much you love the person.
Right, exactly.
It's just that you can't be everywhere all the time.
Right.
And so understanding that. I think also with that same study is that little girls and older women that are married is that the husbands usually rely heavily on the woman, not all the time, but quite often, rely heavily on the woman to do that care. And so that woman usually takes on a lot in the caregiving role.
Yeah.
She'll care for her parents, she'll care for her husband's parents, and so it becomes a lot. That's why you have to be mindful of self.
Yeah.
Caring is a selfless act.
Yes.
It requires a lot of time and a lot of energy, and you have to really pull back and evaluate the situation and see how much time and care needs.
So you're a gerontologist, but you also do geriatric care, correct?
Well, geriatric care management is the practice of what we do.
Okay.
But I'm a gerontologist.
Right.
And so I'm particularly interested in the well-being of how someone ages. Right. And try to study this globally from other aging countries, involved with a lot of extracurricular out-of-work things that with the UN, there's a UN group on aging and the Project 2015, just to study how aging impacts all of us. And one of the things more so that I'm interested in is setting policies, making people aware that we've got to set some policies quickly. Before the boom gets to that really big part of the population.
On a national level, or you mean policy in what regard?
I think policy on a local level, but I look at national things to see what's happening nationally and to see what lessons learned there we can do here in terms of aging as the population increases.
Doesn't each does each governor in each state have somebody that refers to the governor on the aging population?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I think there's a Department of Aging that solely deals with that. But my concern with that is, just generally speaking, is that all areas ought to be looked at. For instance, transportation. Let's go with transportation for a minute. So transportation is a major issue for me, that if we believe older adults need to be socialized and we're keeping them out of an institution, that why don't we have transportation that crosses counties? And so I understand it's a financial thing. I get that. And it's not that simple to be solved. But a little bit more discussion about that. If I would rather have someone age in place in their home with an appropriate setting, safe setting, but get out for socialization, which would cost less on the state and the county and the city in terms of, or having them institutionalized.
I agree totally. I think that's...
And so I just think we just need to spend a little more time looking at some of those things. The bigger picture, because the bigger picture is happening very quickly. 5 years from now, the youngest baby boomer will be 55.
Well, this is the reason why they call it the tidal wave.
Yes.
So, in geriatric care management, tell us more about what type of role that takes on. You're talking about, and use it for the layman, for the viewers that are out there that understand, like DME, you would help pick out DME equipment if need be?
Okay, so yes, so geriatric care management is the start of a process.
Okay.
So you have an aging parent and you say, where do I start? What do I do? I don't know where to start.
Right.
You would call us and we would start that process.
Okay.
So whether it's looking for that equipment, we would find it
Right. Okay.
and get it to you.
Okay.
Or whether it's finding assisted living, we would find an appropriate one
Right.
in the price range that you're looking for,
Right.
do the tours, do the walkthroughs with you,
Right.
and get you in there.
Yep.
Or it could be filling out a Medicaid application, or a Medicaid application,
Or VA.
VA application.
yeah.
Just did Social Security application,
Yeah.
and also met with Social Security multiple times for one particular client in getting her to move from one place to the next place
Yeah.
in terms of getting Social Security. So it varies, but it's all age related and only age related.
So there's a group of, there's a population of people out there that either don't have the time, or it's very confusing to try to do themselves, daughters, sons that are out there, spouses, that can pick up the phone and call a geriatric care management group, such as your company or others, and say, hey, I need help.
Yeah, that's what we do. We directly work with the caregiver or the person being cared for to find everything they need.
Right.
Whether it's, so it could be as simple as getting out the house.
Yeah.
What senior center do I go to?
Right. Or what transportation needs
What
are out
transportation needs do I have, and why do I need to get out? Or I could want to volunteer.
there? Yeah.
Where do I start?
Right. Right. Or what church groups are out there
What
that have senior centers? That's a big thing.
What
in Charlotte.
church group? You want someone to age successfully, independent, as long as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And if it moves to the next level, you modify that and make a care plan that's appropriate for the next move.
Right. Well, I find that to be very useful, especially for people that live alone. In retirement centers, oftentimes people can say, well, point them in the right direction, but people that live alone or daughters that don't know where to go, they can turn that direction. So that's fantastic.
Great.
Yeah. And I'll tell you something, I really appreciate everything that you've been doing.
Thank you.
And both on a national level, but also in your own practice, which is called Elder Care Buddy,
Elder Care Buddy.
which is going to be shown on the screen at the end of the
Great,
show
thank
and
you.
probably during the show.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you very much, Patricia, for coming on the show tonight.
Thanks, Phil.
And Elder Care Buddy, her office is off of Mallard Creek Road, and I want to thank you for coming in and talking about gerontology and geriatric care management. My name is Phil Koch. We're going to say thank you for tuning in tonight, and I look forward to you coming on another show and watching with us with Aging with Attitude. Thank you. Have a good night.